Representative Sharon Shewmake from the 42nd District. You have some housing bills that I would like to ask you about. Let's start with 1660. This is accessory dwelling units. What does that do?
So we are in a housing crisis, as almost anyone who can tell you, whether they have a kid that's looking for a home, a family member looking for a home, or they're looking for a home themselves. And part of this crisis is for every 10 new households that have formed, so that's people moving out or people moving into the state, we've only built 7 new units. And so my background as an economist, when you have 10 people bidding on something there's only 7 of on average, the price ends up being what the 7th wealthiest person can just barely afford. And I think that's what we're seeing in our market, really. So a big part of this is increasing housing supply. And that's hard. That means that you have to build infrastructure out if you're building new single family homes or incorporating land, but we're not looking at some of the infill opportunities we have. And a really big one of those is accessory dwelling units or garden cottages. And so what this bill does, 1660, is it kind of creates a statewide policy for like a minimum for how much cities have to allow these garden cottages. And this is important because I live in Bellingham, and in Whatcom County, some of the smaller cities are starting to see this affordability crisis, right? And so they're seeing this because people are moving from Bellingham into Ferndale, and Bellingham's seeing this because people are moving from the Seattle area into Bellingham. And so we really need this statewide solution, not just city by city, which is going to take too long. And so what we're saying is we want to see more ADUs, and we're saying that cities can't require owner occupancy. We know that's a really big hurdle if you're building an ADU, and it means that you can't move away for a year or two for work and not be able to rent out both units. It also has some requirements added into it that would say that impact fees can't be super high. We put some limits on that. We put some limits on what's the maximum amount of space that they use. So one way if a city doesn't want to do ADUs, they say they can only be 400 square feet. Well, that's not really very useful. And some other pieces also that will help create this statewide strategy that will hopefully unlock an industry of folks building ADUs and producing that affordable housing in our neighborhoods. That means we don't have to build new roads. That means we don't have to build out as much infrastructure to serve them, but that does mean that we'll have more diverse types of housing. And I can especially think about this as people who are just starting off, and maybe a single person that's moving out of their parents' house, but also people that maybe want to age in place. They don't need the 4-bedroom house anymore because their kids have grown up. They want a little bit less space, but they still want to live in their community.
Next, let's talk about 2098. And this one passed capital budget just last week, so it's ready to go, probably on the floor.
Yeah, so last session, we created a low-income home rehabilitation loan program. And the idea with that is that we have some folks that could stay in their homes, they own their homes, but they're very low income. And sometimes there's some repairs that they need to make just to make their home habitable. Things like fixing their roof or fixing some windows. This is a good investment. It's a good investment because if you can help someone fix their home and make it habitable, then that means that they're less likely to be homeless. It's a good investment too, because it's basically a bunch of capital that gets paid back, right? So someone gets their home fixed, they get some help with an upfront loan, and then they pay off that loan over time, and someone else can use that later. The problem is when we did this, we pegged the interest rate at inflation. This was probably a good idea to do before. In the past, I'm 41 years old, and we haven't seen an inflation rate up in the teens since 1980, the year I was born. Generally, inflation's been around 1 or 2.5%. But as you know, this last year, we've seen higher rates of inflation. And having a rate of inflation, having a high interest loan would make these loans not very sustainable. They probably wouldn't be very used. And so what we're trying to do is we're saying, okay, well, we're going to peg it to either inflation or 1.5%. So that means that these folks that are low income that need to do some work on their homes can actually access a low interest loan.
All right. And then lastly, I know that you love solar. That is not a secret. So let's talk about 1814.
So not only is making sure that your home is intact important, but also making sure that we can rein in some energy costs. So I have solar panels on my house. I own my house, and I have good enough credit that I was able to access a loan program. Those are requirements for doing a solar project. We can decouple that, however, with community solar programs. So with community solar, what you can do is maybe someone puts some solar panels on a building somewhere else across town where it's maybe sunnier than your house, but also if you're a renter, you can't necessarily put them on your house. But what you can do is then you can buy a share of that solar electricity. And so if you own that share, then you kind of get credit for it. What this program does is it also acknowledges that folks that are low income that might be able to benefit from this program may not even have the capital to be able to buy those shares. And so we're creating a program that helps with some of those upfront costs so that folks that need to be able to stay in their home and energy usage is an important cost can do that with a community solar program.